Well, welcome everyone to another edition of the Public Interest Technology Colloquium. This week we have Diana Ayton-Shenker with us, sharing her title, The Banker, the Firefighter, and the Anarchist, What Three Strangers Taught Me About Surviving a Near-Fatal Car Crash and Advancing a Global Agenda. My name is Katina. I'm a professor in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society and the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence, and I'm also the director of the Society Policy Engineering Collective. Today, Diana Ayton-Shenker joins us, the CEO of Leonardo and ISAST. It's an amazing occasion. I met Diana 2 years ago and very quickly had an affinity with her, but perhaps only recently realized her depth and breadth of knowledge. She's the CEO of Global Momenta, a network that she founded some decades ago, 2003, I think, from memory. And Global Momenta calls on a select international network of consultants and strategic partnerships from diverse fields. Think about the number of disciplines you can conceive of in business, in philanthropy, in finance, in public policy, in organizational management, and of course, international relations. And you find this all in the one package. In fact, few people might know that Diana started her studies at the University of Pennsylvania in international relations, if I'm not mistaken, and in addition, went on to study at University of Essex on a specialized program on international humanitarian law. So from law to social innovation and social entrepreneurship, we're in for an incredible spoiler hour of this incredible person with this very unique mix of background. I encourage you all to go to Diana's website, dianaaytonshenker.com, but also Global Momenta, and to listen carefully to the many hours of videos and literature she has written and authored and penned, books that have been both edited and poetry volumes, and also the application of her knowledge space. It's something that seems very simplistic because of the way that she presents herself and identifies with various disciplines, but her mission is one we should all be paying attention to. It's really about social good and social impact. And somehow, all of these diverse disciplines that she's drawn to herself come into play, but you do ask yourself, how does this one person bring all of these different theoretical backgrounds, networks, all together? And she'll describe to us today how that is and why that is. I do want to give a plug to this amazing book, A New Global Agenda, that was published around about the time, I think, that the Sustainable Development Goals were defined. And I do want to actually ask her so many questions, not just about the book, but its implications. So with that, I think I'll stop sharing and invite Diana to share her presentation. But while she's getting ready to do that, today is going to be one of those authentic occasions. We have with us someone who I feel is very human, displays authenticity in all that she does, and is empathic. Diana Ayton-Shenker comes with empathic intelligence because of her work, but let's listen to her message now, and with all my heart, welcome, Diana.
Well, thank you so much, Katina, for that incredible introduction. I'm very moved to hear those words and consider this opportunity, such a privilege to get to learn together and dwell together in considering public interest technology and how it aligns with the lives that we live and the work that we share together. So I wanted to begin before going through these slides by sharing with this group a really important story in my life. It's a true story that I haven't really shared before publicly or professionally. So this was a kind of pivot point for me to consider how my encounter with a banker, a firefighter, and an anarchist changed my life, but also clarified my life at a pivotal moment. So I'm going to take us back 11 and a half years to International Women's Day, March 8th, 2010. And it was it was a very cold day. And the snow from the winter had just melted in the Northeast, where I was driving at rush hour, 5 o'clock at the end of the day, 70 miles an hour down a highway, and the car lost control and started to fishtail. And miraculously, I fishtailed across. It was a new term I hadn't heard before. To fishtail means the back of the car is going like this, like a fish's tail. All of a sudden, that made a lot of sense. And I lost control of the car at rush hour, 70 miles an hour on a very cold day. And somehow I found my car skidding while fishtailing across 2 lanes of traffic. And miraculously, I avoided hitting another car or being hit by a car. And as I was going straight for a cement pylon that was holding up the overpass above, I missed that head-on collision by a couple inches because the car started to roll. And the highway rollover that then ensued a couple times miraculously landed the car on the side of the road, not in the middle of the road. So I found myself in this upended position with the car landing on the side of the road on the passenger side. I was the driver. There was no one else in the car. I was wearing a seatbelt, which saved my life, and found myself suspended in the driver's seat as the car was on the passenger side. So I'm, you can imagine, kind of up above, on the side. Did that immediate quick scan. Am I okay? I'm okay. Am I hurt? I'm okay. Am I here? I'm okay. I knew immediately I was okay, and that I needed to get out of this overturned car or side-turned car. There had been smoke that I didn't see from the impact. There was that horrible screeching sound that I didn't hear from the moment. There was that sense of complete timelessness and time standing still. Everything slowed down and then it stopped at the same moment. And I knew I was here, I was okay. And I unfastened my seatbelt and stood on the passenger side door and opened up the driver's side door above me like a hatch. So I lifted up and I'm standing there and I waved my hands to the rush hour traffic going by at 70 miles an hour at 5 o'clock in the evening on a very cold March 8th day. And I waved my hands, I'm okay, help. And before anything else could happen, I grabbed my handbag and my phone. And I didn't realize my handbag, of course, was empty at this point because everything had fallen out of it. But I grabbed what turned out to be empty handbag and my phone. And I lifted myself up from the sides of the door and swung my legs up over, preparing to find my way down from the car. Not thinking, gee, this is a precarious position for the car, but thinking, I've seen TV, I've seen movies, I know I need to get out of the car. So I'm at the top of the car, clutching my empty clutch and my phone. And before I could find my way down, a pair of strangers' hands were thrust up in the air in front of me. And a strange man said to me, I've got you. And I looked down at this stranger and I said, you got me? And he said, I've got you. And I put myself into his arms and he carried me away from the car. I think we were all afraid it was going to explode or something, which did not happen. He carried me enough of a distance away that he could set me down on the side of the road. The snow had melted, but it was still frozen hard. And as I sat there saying, I'm okay, he started asking me first aid questions. Can you tell me what happened? Do you know your name? I was completely lucid. I was completely focused. I was completely coherent. I didn't have a bruise on my body. I didn't have hair out of place. I couldn't understand how that could happen, nor could he, looking at me and looking at the car. But we were joined immediately by two other people who sat down with me and this guy on the side of the road. And these three strangers talked me through one by one. Can you tell me what happened? Do you know your name? Do you know where you are? Is there anyone we should call? And one by one, they took care of things that needed taken care of. So the first person who came and helped me down from the car ran to his vehicle where he had a first aid kit. And he brought it back in case he needed anything, but there was no blood, there were no scrapes, there was nothing. I said, I just don't understand it. And he had everything ready to go, and he kept asking me questions and checking in. And the second guy made sure that I had the information that I needed for the insurance company. It was a rented car. I kept saying, I didn't buy the extra insurance. I know that's a scam. I don't need extra insurance. I have car insurance. And there's this car totaled. And he said, we'll get information for the insurance company. And it turns out that that person had followed my car. He saw it roll over and crash. He saw the impact. He stopped and was expecting to pull a dead body out of a burning car. But instead, as my husband says, it was just an intense Jewish woman helping herself out of the car. He called 911. So he contained himself from shaking most of the 45 minutes that he sat with me, having called 911, made sure we had the information for the insurance, made sure that I had information of what I would need to process and go forward. The third person who stopped helped the vehicles that kept coming. He helped set up cones on the highway to demarcate where it was safe to travel past. He spoke to the police, the police who stopped, and then the state trooper, and then the second state trooper. He spoke with the tow trucks who came, with the fire department. He spoke with the EMT when the ambulance came. And these three strangers who stopped by the side of the road to help a stranger at rush hour in a very cold day, 5 o'clock in the evening at 70 miles an hour, stayed with me for 45 minutes, probably closer to 50 minutes, 55 minutes, until I was ready to go in the ambulance to get checked out by the hospital. I kept saying, I'm fine. Every car that stopped, the police, the state troopers, the tow trucks, the ambulance, they just looked at me and they looked at the car and they said, I just don't get it. There's just no explanation. You must have a serious core of angels looking out for you. And I realized as I was preparing to leave these three strangers and go into the ambulance as was required, even though I felt no need, that I had a few angels already with me. So the first thing that I did before I left them was to ask for their names, because having sat together for nearly an hour, we hadn't even exchanged. I knew nothing about their lives. I didn't know their names or who they were in the world. But I knew that they were sharing an intense, intimate moment of their humanity. You know how it is when you drive along and there's a crash and you see it and you feel sick, you feel tense, you feel this, the most atheist of us unconsciously utter a prayer. Please God, don't let it be anyone I know. And then you feel a little guilty about it. You say, oh, please God, let them be okay, whoever it is. And we keep driving because you have to get someplace, or it's late, or you can't help, but there's already cars. But these three strangers, these angels, had stopped wherever they were going at rush hour in the cold and sat outside with me for nearly an hour. So I stopped to get their names so I could tell them I was okay the next day and thank them. The first person was a little hesitant. But the second person, who had called 911 and had received information I would need to process the with the insurance company, gave me his business card. Remember business cards when we would actually hold hands and exchange things? So he gave me his business card, and it turned out he was a banker. And the banker took care of the system's support that I needed at that moment. He enabled and called on and mobilized what I would need to enable me to pass through this pivotal moment. He worked for a bank. He was an executive, a vice president of a bank. The second person, who was the third who stopped, gave me his card, and he was a fire chief. He worked for the fire department. He wasn't in his, fireman's outfit or in a fire truck. He was just driving home. He was on his time off. But this firefighter took care of public safety. He looked out for the public good. He was concentrated on the public interest at this moment. He made sure that the area was safe, that the public service resources that came were managed and attended to. He also gave me his card. The third person said, well, I don't have a card, but reluctantly he gave me his name. So I wrote down his name. I thought, I'm going to find him. I get into the ambulance, and the very first lesson that I learned from these three strangers came through the EMT, the person riding in the ambulance with me. And all of a sudden I realized, having told my story, what just happened to the three strangers and all the vehicles who had come and gone, I realized what had just happened and how close I came. And I just said out loud, I'm so glad that I'm alive. And she said to me, this was not your time to die. And immediately, it came to me, this message, as if someone were standing there right in front of me speaking to me. And this voice said, you are here to do this work. That was the first lesson. You are here to do this work, not stop and smell the roses, not eat better, exercise more, not you are here to do your job, not you are here to get these grades or complete this achievement. You are here to do this work. That was the very first lesson. These three strangers stopped by the side of the road to do their work, not their jobs, not their profession, but their work. I realized sometime thereafter, to paraphrase Lily Tomlin, the great Lily Tomlin, that when she says, I always wanted to be somebody, but now I realized I should have been more specific. And I realized, oh yeah, I'm here to do this work, but I got to figure out what that work is. And the trick is we all have to keep figuring out what that work is. And that's what I'm going to share with you a bit more today, with what that work has been and become for me, as Katina said in her introduction, moving in and out and through many different fields, with the through line being not just social good, not just make the world a better place, but specifically, how can we become more human and more humane?
Diana, can I just say thank you for sharing that opening story. In one of your interviews, you talk about dynamism, and everything's dynamic and ever changing. And I hear that.
It's such a good point. It's true. Everything is always changing. So even if you figure out what your work is, then it changes, because our world changes. We're not stagnant. We're not automatons. We are living creatures. We're alive. And so the work is to constantly wrestle with what the true beauty and power and potential of that work is. And we can be assisted in that process by looking at work as putting our values in action. So the image that's chosen here is dynamic. Is it moving on your screens? Can you see that? Oh, good. So there are synapses that are firing all the time. When we are doing our work, we are putting our values in action. It's not a value statement and it's static. It's something living. How can we be guided in that process? One of the guideposts I've turned to is looking at a compass of core directions that I always had a hard time with in a two-dimensional compass because they didn't interact. It suggested a circular linearity, a sequence, but actually this sphere is more what I mean. If we could have a spherical compass with my 4 critical compass points that guide our values in action, that guide us each to figure out what is our work, and collectively, what is our work? Inspiration, intention, integrity, and impact. What inspires us? What is the trigger? What is the thing that's keeping us up at night, that's getting us up in the morning? This is the spark that instigates our values in action. And it's a core direction, a North Star. So is our intention. As Gandhi teaches us, for those concerned about public interest, technology, or human rights law, or social innovation, or impactful art and creativity, that it's not just that we must embody this vision, that we must be the change we need to see. But I believe our intention helps us articulate how we can see the change we need to be. If we are going to be the change we need to see, we have to see it. That's our intention. Our integrity is a key compass point in enabling our values to be put in action, our work. Integrity is not just having those values aligned, but it's that too. I mean integrity in 2 senses. It's very much the how we put our values in action. Integrity in the sense of that which is integral. It's core, it's essential. It has to happen. And that which is integrated. It's not isolated. It's part of all of what we do. It's part of our individual and collective ecosystems, integrity. And finally, we need to be guided by that which is impactful. It's very tempting, especially I think in spheres of technology, to be seduced by the cleverness of innovation, with art and science to be distracted by how smart we could be or how talented we could be. But it's not enough just to be more effective or advanced or skilled in our spheres of activity. We need to be impactful. We need to ask ourselves that other question, not just what are we doing, but so what? What are we doing it for? And we certainly realize that today. One of the things that I did in response to that question of so what, if we're going to be the change we want to see, what is that change that we want to see? How do we see it? How do we articulate it? Was to pull together a collective of 24 authors from 9 countries to help articulate, not with the arrogance of answers, but with the audacity of questions, a new global agenda. We could come back to talk more about this, Kat, but it attempts to lay out what the priorities, practices, and pathways are of the international community, which was a follow-on to the first 2 books that I did that looked at the global agenda of the United Nations. When I was doing those books around 9/11, and then the year following, I thought to myself, it's great to analyze the UN's performance as the international diplomatic community, but we really need to call on all of us. We need all hands on deck. So what is the international community mean, and how might we consider an agenda, not as a static endpoint, but as a guideline, beginning point for all of us. And I think that guiding question of seeing the world through a new global agenda, reimagining our world, led me to clarify what I think is my work, but it's still evolving. And that's how can we become more human and more humane. And one way that I have been exploring that is increasingly in partnership with my partner and husband, Bill Ayton, who is an artist approaching his place in the world and his work from very different points of origin and entry and system, but in a way that brings our worlds together. So I especially like this image because it shows the hands of two beloved people in my life, my husband's holding up the AR art of the tower that it has the sky actually of Arizona in the background. And my dear friend Martha Southgate has her hands holding the AR art through the screen at Union Square in New York City. We had a history of collaboration on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights art exhibit that traveled through Europe and North America to celebrate human rights with the UN, and then with the War Room looking at issues of war and peace and artistic freedom, especially during wartime. But increasingly, we've been collaborating with technology to create augmented reality public art. The first major piece that we did was called New Babel. And this is a compilation of some screenshots of a 10-story tall digital art sculpture that Bill designed in Union Square to coincide with the New School Centennial and the UN General Assembly's side event in 2019. The tower is reclaimed from the biblical notion of Babel as a symbol of discontent and fracture to be instead a symbol of collaboration through knowledge. And it's the AR design is textured or wallpapered with a 2D painting that Bill had done of New Babel years before. It upholds a rotating orb, a globe at the top, signifying the new world, that our collaborative aspirations collectively uphold. And the textured painting covering that globe is the same image on the cover of my book, New Global Agenda. The image is surrounded foundationally with 4 billboard-sized paintings reinterpreting the 4 freedoms of Roosevelt: freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom of expression, and freedom of thought. Those are reinterpretations for this moment. More recently, we collaborated on this image-contained New World City to be installed with a vision to be installed at Union Square in San Francisco. It has not yet been realized there. It was a call for a competitive exhibition hosted by the 2112 Foundation at the end of 2020, and was privileged to receive the 2020 Visionary Award, reimagining the city in the wake of COVID, a city without senses. And as New Babel attempted to reimagine the world, see the change we want to be in the world in new ways, New World City, it reimagines our place in the world, as more than half of us now live in urban centers. And all of us have been touched by the transformative impact of COVID. This reimagining how we can see the change we want to be in the world, how we might become more human and more humane, brings me to my current work with Leonardo, the International Society of Arts, Science, and Technology, and our collaboration with Arizona State University. And it brings us to the even larger, perhaps, imperative to reimagine everything. So to reimagine everything, we have to start where we are and recognize that these are truly extraordinary times. We need this extraordinary vision because we have never been in the situation we face today of existential threats and global opportunities to address them. It's just stunning to me that we are facing the greatest threats and challenges in the recorded history of our species at a moment when we have unprecedented capacity if we use our imagination and mobilize our resources and dedicate technology to the public interest to actually solve problems, to actually bring extraordinary vision to this extraordinary time. The unprecedented challenges we face of complex problems require creative solutions. We can't imagine how to go forward. We can't imagine what's going to come next. Our world is literally on fire. It is drowning, and we are struggling for our breath. And this is where Leonardo comes in, because Leonardo brings fearless imagination. And we bring fearless imagination by empowering creative pioneers to harness the power of art and science, to harness the power of technology, to imagine what comes next, to envision how to navigate ahead. We harness the power of collaboration, and we do this having built and become part of an ecosystem of creativity across disciplines, from arts and science and technology. And to that, we can draw on our additional disciplines of law and of literature and philanthropy and investment finance, innovation, and entrepreneurship. We do this through Leonardo to harness the power of an international community that is privileged to publish the world's leading art, science, technology journal with MIT Press, that is a peer-reviewed academic journal together with our suite of other publications and our creative programs and community building platforms, including a global network of laser talks, our salon series, active now in 48 cities around the world, and our residencies, fellowships, including our recently launched fellowship with ASU's CSI, Center for Science and Imagination. Our fearless imagination allows us to unleash possibilities. And with our extraordinary visionaries and change makers, we can unleash the possibility to reimagine everything. This is a collective movement. We need all of us. If we can galvanize creative potential to transform our world, to reimagine everything, we need to be thinking and acting and humanizing our systems, our networks, and our ideas. If we have time, we can come back and talk more detail about some of the ways we're launching and preparing to develop with ASU and across the Leo sphere of Leonardo's partners and community systems transformations with a collective and collaborative efforts at the creative economy, unleashing the creative workforce, mobilizing our networks, and amplifying radical access, and incubating transformative ideas. The ideas we're incubating through Cryptech Incubator, a new incubator of a 3-year pilot program supported by the California Arts Council, created by, for, and with artists and advocates who reimagine technology with a disability lens. We incubate ideas through Leo Labs in partnership with a Seize the Moment new initiative that the Humanities Lab and Leonardo, together with Global Futures Lab at ASU, is experimenting with to apply an arts science lens to global futures challenges. To amplify our network, we not only mobilize our lasers, our speaker series around the world, but are building a liftoff platform to showcase innovative ventures and ideas coming out of our partnership ecosystem and our pipeline through Cryptech and Leo Labs. To transform systems, we are developing a Leonardo index that maps out and acknowledges through a rating system the creativity across sectors that industries, institutions, communities, and college campuses can exemplify, like LEED certification for buildings that are green. The Leonardo Index can certify institutions that are creative. And finally, the Leonardo Core builds out ways to embed creative professionals at all stages of learning and all stages of career across all spheres of the economy. The vision that we have for unleashing these possibilities to reimagine everything is really introducing a new creativity agenda. So we're building from a new global agenda to a new creativity agenda, recognizing that a creativity lens can unleash the best of human ingenuity and the best of human imagination, both of which we need today to inspire the change that we are seeing and that we want to be. That means humanizing digital culture. So as we have seen with COVID in particular, the accelerated and unbelievably rapid digitization of human culture, the fact that we're having this conversation today through this screen has awakened in me this urgency to correlate and respond to digitizing human culture with humanizing digital culture. That means bringing authenticity, bringing vulnerability, bringing genuine connection, bringing creativity, bringing our highest self, bringing compassion, bringing empathy to our digital experience. This is how we will deepen digital trust. And at a time when we've seen this expansion of digitized human experience, we're also seeing an erosion of trust in our social institutions. We need to deepen that trust, especially on the digital level, and can do so by mobilizing the creative community and awakening the creative spark in all of us. This is a time to do it, not only because of where and how our world is evolving, but even because we have earmarked this year as the year for creative economy for sustainable development from UNCTAD. The UN has recognized that the creative economy comprising $2.25 trillion globally, 3% of the GDP, is one of the most influential, catalytic, and growing areas of economic activity, one of the most significant on-ramps for women, for people of color, for marginalized populations and people and individuals and communities to enter the workforce and enter economic activity. In order to see the change and be that change for sustainable development, we need to mobilize creatives who are at the forefront of the new economy, experimenting with the new tools of non-fungible tokens, of cryptocurrency, of new ways of moving resources and sharing resources, experimenting with universal base income. In both of these areas, new kinds of currency and new distributions of currency, artists and creatives have been at the forefront. And it's not only upending the art world or what we think of as creative industries, it's serving as a benchmark for all industries. And we need to engage that at this moment. In this context, we are now entering the second third and the last 2/3 of the Sustainable Development Goals period, the 15-year period that, yes, coincided with the beginning of my work on a new global agenda, which was response to not only the Sustainable Development Goals being approved in 2015 and enacted at the beginning of 2016, but of course the other movements for global change activated that year that I thought would be, wow, the breakthrough year of global cooperation and collaboration, but in fact ended in 2016 with the election of governments in several places around the world, including the United States, of new administrations that were not receptive and were obstructionist to global cooperation on the issues that we needed most for sustainable development, for climate change action, and for equitable policies and programs and practices in sheltering our population around the world. So the creative economy is essential at this moment for sustainable development. And we know that as critical as this year is, we're just beginning this decade that will set the course for the future of humanity. It also happens to be a pivotal moment with the organization of Leonardo and the growth of ASU. So ASU is arising not only as the world's most innovative university, but the most sustainable and one of the most innovative in online lifelong learning. In that context, Leonardo's growth online of over 62% last year alone makes this a pivotal moment for us to build on the 10,000 artists and scholars we've published, the 135 countries we currently represent, the over 750,000 page views we're now receiving, and nearly as many articles downloaded from our publications. Creativity for transformation is truly what the world needs today. And as we've been saying in our signatures over the last year and a half, we are all in this together. That's the second lesson that I learned from those strangers. Remember them by the side of the road when it was very cold at 70 miles an hour at rush hour in a highway rollover. My banker, my firefighter, and my anarchist. They were the people who showed up when I needed them. They were my essential workers. Now, how did I know that the anarchist was an anarchist? He didn't have a business card, as would be appropriate for anarchists. He just gave me his name. So what I found was that not knowing who they were and what they were, that they were my essential team, that when I needed them in that moment, these were the people who appeared. The banker who could enable and mobilize system support. The firefighter who could ensure public safety and a clear environment. An individual, turned out to be an anarchist, I'll tell you in a second how I knew, and who mobilized individual action. He didn't wait for authority or invitation. He simply acted with his trusty first aid kit from his car and his upheld hands to carry me in his arms to safety. These were the essential people who came to me at that moment when I needed them. What is our work? If we are here to do this work, and that can change, and it will change, the question remains that we do not do this in isolation. So who is essential for us? As we think about public interest technology, who are the essential partners we need? Who's our banker? Who's our firefighter? Who's that individual? And at least as importantly, who are we essential for? How are we essential? Because here's my PS story. The third lesson that I learned from the banker, the firefighter, and the anarchist. First was, what is our work? We're here to do this work. The second was, who is essential and how can we be essential? But the third was this, that we start now, we start where we are. Because that's what they did. They taught me, you start right now. Become more human, become more humane, change systems and networks and ideas. That starts right now, right here with each of us. And it started with the three of them at that moment. So the next day, March 9th, I woke up in the morning and at 9 a.m. I sent out a bunch of notes. I had the banker's card, so I knew what to send to him. I had the firefighter's card, so I knew where to reach him. But the other guy just had his name scrawled on a piece of paper. So I looked everywhere I could and I found him. I found him on Facebook. Now, ironically, irony not lost on me, I found him in a Facebook group of anarchists. So let's just set aside the irony that there's a group that you belong to for anarchists. Okay, so that was a thing. So I could send him a note. I found him and I sent him a note. Now, I thanked these three people for not only not knowing anything about their lives, but rising to the occasion at that moment to be sure and tell me that they were essential and that of all the people who could stop, they were the ones who did. And all three of these people, the banker, the firefighter, and the anarchist, responded to my note saying, I'm okay, thank you so much, you changed my life. They all responded to me saying the same thing verbatim, all three of them. And this is what they said. They said, I just did what anyone else would do. I just did what you should do. I did what anyone else would do. But at that moment, no one else did. So we all know that we all could be that person who stops, but we might not be. So what I learned was that it was the through line for these three people, these strangers. They thought, I'm just doing what anyone else should do. But they were the ones who needed to do it at that moment. So don't miss it. At that moment, when you need to be the essential person, or you need to recognize and receive the essential person, who I guarantee you are there for you right now. Bring them in, sit by the side of the road, receive the system support that they offer, the public safety that's needed, the individual attention. Start where we are right now to become more human and more humane. The world needs us all to be doing that now, and that's how we will reimagine everything and see the change we want to be.
Thank you, Diana. Ayton-Shenker. What a story and what a charter. And those 3 lessons we'll never forget ourselves in listening to you. So we're here to do this work, and you've brought us into that vortex with you. I'm left with an image of a globe that's fishtailing, and it's gone on its side. And you're challenging us to put it on its axis again, so it continues to spin and it remains sustainable.
What a powerful and beautiful image. You know, I need someone who understands probably physics to guide us in this way of seeing the world. But I see that image. That's beautiful, Kat. Like that is what's happened to the world. But you know, but it's not lost. It's just it's fishtailing. We've lost control. And part of that might be that healthy, hopefully healthy lesson we continually relearn, that it's not about control, it's about graceful movement. You know, we think we're in control. How arrogant is that? We're not. We're part of something much bigger that calls on us to bring our best selves to bear. So when I think of the world, I'm reminded of my favorite novel. That's coming back to this image, Kat, called Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner. So Wallace Stegner wrote this book and received the Pulitzer Prize for Angle of Repose. It's a novel, a fiction, in the early 70s. And the title comes from, it's a great book, tells the story of a retiring professor who is coming to terms with his late life disability by reading through letters written by his pioneering grandmother to the best friend woman she left behind. So it's this amazing book. And the title comes from a term in physics which I did not know. But the angle of repose refers to the point at which a sphere, like a pebble rolling down a hill, finds its natural stopping point and just stops. And that's the metaphor for the story in the novel. I read this in my early 20s. I was newly married and I was living in Paris and I was working for UNESCO, and it sounds really great and it was really great, but I was, you know, in my angsty 20s thinking, what am I doing in my life and what am I doing? And I read this novel. I'm like, oh my God, that's it. I'm finding my angle of repose. What I didn't realize is you don't find it and then you're done. We're here to do this work and it keeps changing. The world is moving. It's finding a new angle of repose. And it's a turbulent and disorienting process, but it's there. We just need to find what that is and recognize that it's fragile and it's precious. And so when we recalibrate our systems, our digital culture, our climate stewardship, our relationship to our resources economically, our resources in our interpersonal relationships, our relationship to other living creatures and systems, biosystems on the planet. When we figure all that out, we need to perhaps learn from our indigenous and other elders the wisdom that you don't figure it out and it's done, because something else will come along. And it doesn't have to be climate change or COVID. It might be new insights and breakthroughs, and we'll need to recalibrate again. So that image of the world fishtailing is really powerful, Kat, because it's still, we haven't landed yet. We haven't found that angle of repose yet.
I'm also struck by the 3 people: the fire safety chief, the banker, and the anarchist. As newly completed graduate student, or almost completed, in my final year of university, we were headhunted by all these big companies. Unilever was one of them, and thrust into a group of 20 young people vying for that major role. We were observed at probably the 5th stage of this process of who would get shortlisted and get the job of this fast-track career within Unilever. And the observation were two partners in Unilever, two managing directors that came to observe us in the room. And 20 people walked into a room side by side and had a piece of paper face down. And they told us we had 20 minutes to solve the problem once we turned over the leaf. And on that sheet of paper was a banker, was a fire safety chief, was a mother, a priest, a teacher, a janitor. Sort of 12. And I've used this experiment in my classes because what they told us is, who's the most important? Figure it out. It was a trick question. And of course, the more vibrant, enthusiastic extroverts in the room, that we were not all from the same university, we didn't know each other, started to say, you know, it's this person, no, it's this person, no, it's this person, no, it's this person, no, if it's not the mother, then there'll be no births. And if it's not for the priest, there'll be no confessions. And if it's not for the banker, there'll be no money. And they were all fighting in the room, who was the most important. And I hadn't spoken for the whole of that observation. I'm just waiting to see when's the dust going to settle, because I didn't want to sound stupid, but also I didn't know the answer. And the answer was apparent to me. Everyone was important. But we had to demonstrate how we would come about to a solution. So I knew I needed a methodology. And most people in the room were not talking method. They weren't talking about a process of development, nor were they talking about creativity or art. As you have said, there's this intersection that has to come together in order to create a new world city, a new Babel, a new world, a new method, a new approach. The current one is not working. They've stood the test of time, but the complexity of the world, as William DeBar says, the entanglement of the world, it will not allow us to progress in the same vein. Some of my colleagues even 10 years ago said, do we need to rewrite human rights law? And you have studied that, you know what I'm talking about. Is it time for something else to come in to allow for this equity, access and transparency and responsibility? But I go back to the story because it was quite a simple answer. Everyone is important. We could show that. And so what I simply said is, what's the risk of not having that person? Literally in the last 3 minutes, they told us we had 3 minutes, otherwise we'd all flunk and none of us would get up on that short list. So I put up my hand and I said, would you like me to offer? I grabbed a pen to the whiteboard, and I literally said, hands up, roll number 1. What's the risk of not having this? Anyway, as we work through the list, Diana, everyone kept raising their hand for every single one of those roles. And so the risk factor was, we need everyone. You can't have a society without a janitor, the rubbish will build up. You can't have a society without all of these different roles and responsibilities. So somehow I think you were meant to come and tell this story. We're sure happy that you were unscathed, but the long-lasting memories, I think, is for the benefit of all of us coming together to listen to you today. And I leave with two things. Something that resonates throughout all your talks is faith. And many people don't talk about faith, nor do they talk about the importance of spirituality, nor do they talk about their connection to the nature, to the connection to a higher power, or a connection to something, this interconnectedness, this creation process we're all engaged in. And the second thing is the freedom of fear. You talked about this so often in your videos. If we just stopped fearing one another and coming together, if we just stopped fearing the fact that we haven't stopped yet and we're not at that angle of repose. And I think that's what you bring to us, this amazing thrust of, I have no fear. You lived through the fear in the accident, and you're here to tell us we've got things to do. So with that, I think I'm going to open to questions for 5 minutes before we allow our second speaker, Sherry Wasserman, her presentation. But from the depths of my heart, thank you so much for coming to present today.